Good morning, Reminiscable here, and I wanted to talk about why sometimes I go up to people and I'm like, I just mention like, yeah, I wouldn't want my child to be a conservative Christian. And that sounds like really vague to some people, but I guess I'll go down reasons. So, for those of you who aren't humanist, that's basically like an ideology where you respect other people's well-being, right? Um, Now, well-being and like respecting someone as a person are different, right? You value someone's well-being because you value your own well-being. That's the path, that's the route I took to reach that paradigm of being altruistic, is that you, towards well-being, valuing, I mean, it's not even being altruistic, that's just decency to respect other people's well-being, whether physical or mental. And if they do stuff to infringe on, violate other people's rights, infringe on other people's well-being, um, then like the rights being violated takes precedent over that respect. But because there's more than one person in the world. So we want to maximize everyone's well-being. Now, this has a lot of different approaches. There's moral relativism, objective morality, moral absolutism, which you would get with Christian conservatism, conservative Christianity. Oh, same thing. Um, Now, the problem is, if you're a conservative Christian, you'll be taught, like, okay, well, this is what God says, this is God's word, and this is how you are a good person by doing this, this, this in the Bible. Now I can go through how like God commits genocide against Canaanites, God commits genocide against Egyptians after hardening a pharaoh's heart and then using the pharaoh as an excuse to commit that genocide. Um, or how God is supposed to be omnipotent and created the universe and created Satan and created disease and created aging. And basically, um, if you have a conservative Christian, that is, if you have a Christian or really um, anyone who worships a benevolent deity, then that sets up for becoming a psychopath later on and also being irrational. So the psychopath argument, since I'm going down the list of why I hate the Christian God and would never worship him, is because when you have a murderer or a rapist, their justification can basically be, well, God knows what's going to happen. God knows I'm going to rape slash murder this person, and therefore it's justified. And if the innocents being bombed, or, well, the 90% miss rate on droning, those innocents might be praying for their families to survive or for themselves to survive. And of all of those people, maybe those few that do survive, you can say, oh, well, yeah, that's because God intervening. And what about all of those innocents who are faithful worshippers of your God of choice and who are morally good people by any standard? Um, a lot of them get killed, and and if we make a prediction based on past data, we can also predict that they will die of age or some other cause in the future, probably within the next century. So, oh gosh, well, looks like God endorses death then. And then yes, your God, not the one, whichever you define, but specifically the God of whoever would be watching the video. Now, yeah, that's you. Or maybe you're just listening. Anyways, so when you have a rapist and the victim is like, God, please save me, and the rapist is like, oh, wait, I'm a Christian. Huh, God's not saving this person. I guess that means God wants me to rape him. And then we have these serial rapists. And that is how I would define a psychopath. Like, I guess anyone can define a psychopath as whatever, but like, That's like a cruel, vicious psychopath. Speaking of vicious, there's also so do you get it now? The God in the Bible endorses rape, endorses slavery. His prophets thought that the earth orbited the sun, and like when you have these innocent people who even worship your God of choice, um, they still get raped, they still get murdered violently, and they still die of disease and old age. So, and then you can say, well, Satan. And here's where we come to vicious regressions, which is basically okay, let's define circular logic. Circular logic is where you have a presumption based upon itself. So, your proof for your assumption, you assert something. God is benevolent, right? And then your proof for God being benevolent is that God is benevolent, therefore God is benevolent, therefore God is benevolent. Like when you assume the premise to be true in order to prove the premise, that is called circular logic, and it is a fallacy. Now, you can have exceptions to circular logic. Well, oh, everything bad that happens is because of Satan. But then, if your premise for everything bad that happens is because of Satan, because everything that bad that happens is because of Satan, well, that's also circular logic. And so, even if that resolves the first self-contradiction of God being benevolent, um, the circular logic of God being benevolent, even though it's resolved by everything bad happening being due to Satan, if the Satan argument is also a circular logic fallacy, then God that makes the God being benevolent a vicious regression, which is basically a set of interdependent circular logical arguments. And when you teach your kids that, which is basically what being a Christian conservative is, you're basically punishing your kids for questioning circular logic, and then you teach your kids to basically self-justify anything whatsoever, including rape and murder, via fallacious circular logic. And so here's the problem with that. The problem with that is it can lead to extreme. I do want to monetize this video, so. Uh, anyways, it lead to extreme acts of violence, and people will self-justify that, and that's. I'll just say it. That is a tenet of terrorism, is that you have religious fundamentalism backing up the fallacies needed in order to avert the guilt associated with extreme cruelty. Now, you can also have like selective nihilism or apathy or dehumanization, um, or even stuff like someone else is worse than me, therefore it's not bad if I do this because someone else is doing it even more, right? And you get paradigms like carnism, where people are like, well, it's okay to mistreat animals because other people mistreat animals even more than me. So what difference does it make if I murder several animals? Well, the difference is you're murdering those several animals, right? So if there's 10 animals that are like violently murdered and you only murder one, well, the difference is if you weren't murdering animals, there'd only be 9 animals that are violently murdered. And so you are responsible for the one that is violently murdered. And because we live in a system of predatory capitalism where people are forced to work to survive, most of the blame for consumerism lies on the consumer who is paying the workers who are forced to work if they want to survive. And by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we could assert that morality is a luxury. First, you need food, shelter, whatnot. before you can say, okay, what I'm doing is completely fucked up and I'm not going to do it anymore. But of course, the meat industry hires the people who basically are in poverty and don't have a choice. Um, by the same reasoning, no. By the same class system, you could argue that going through an existential crisis while young is frowned upon due to the repercussions. For the same reason that allowing the working class to get out of poverty um, would is frowned upon because that would empower the working class and destabilize the predatory capitalist like class wealth distribution. Classist, is that a word? Classist? The skewed wealth distribution of predatory capitalism. And so by credit, I hope you guys know what predatory capitalism is. There's a nice Jimmy Dore show talk about it where he interviews someone. So yeah, I'd like to mention the benefits of going through an existential crisis, because I think that ultimately is a motivator for being humanist, being altruistic, and for not dehumanizing people outside of your tribe, outside of your family, outside of your country, outside of your species, outside of your biological structure, right? Because at the end of the day, we are a set of clusters of neurons temporarily existing in space-time, being stimulated by environmental stimuli and our pre-existing like mental framework, and just these fleeting trains of cognitive thought flickering through our synapses um, is basically a realistic self identity to have, and yet this self identity is mirrored in other people, which is comforting. Most of the time, it is mirrored in animals that have brains, and it is mirrored in simulations of human brains, which you can debate. Same with animals, you can debate. My my classification of what is a person is not binary, it is weighted. So a worm with only a few brain cells, more than a few, but a brain with only a few neural clusters, I might, like only one, I would weigh as less of a person than, say, a chicken that has a lot. Um, I think self awareness and autonomy are important. And I think intelligence or cognitive power are also important. And being a logical thinker allows someone to express that cognitive power. Uh, Now, what is cognitive power? I haven't defined it, but basically, for simplicity's sake, because I am not a deer, I am not a chicken, I am not a, well, I am not, for practical intents and purposes, a simulation inside a computer as we define computers. Um, ooh, but the thing is, for simplicity's sake, I just weight towards the neural mass, not of the nervous system, but of the brain. So you basically count the neurons, and I guess for an AI, you would like, I guess, arbitrarily assign a. Yeah, I know. I actually haven't thought of this before, but you could assign like a corresponding mass of a brain, if like of the brain you're simulating via an AI. And but anyways, see, the thing with AI is they can think faster because of having processors. So I wouldn't know how to value an AI. I guess I would base it off of human intelligence, where myself would be one unit, or you could base it off yourself being one unit of person, And so if you're like twice as intelligent as a 1 year old human child, and the cow is twice as intelligent as a 1 year old human child, then you would be worth as much as the cow, and you would be worth two human children, right? And that would be your worth as a person. And so if you murder two human children, then you are now evil. Um, and so while I wouldn't respect you, I would still say, yes, your well-being still has an inherent value. It's just offset by the intentional evil well, it's offset by whatever evil you're directly or indirectly causing. And of course, um, if you're going to be making a system for karma, which I do believe is imaginary, your karma should add up to the suffering inflicted. Like, because suffering inflicted has a 1-to-1 ratio to me for evil, because I think that suffering is bad, and so that's actually how I define evil, by suffering inflicted. And there's preventable suffering. So if there is a benevolent God, they would prevent predation, they would prevent famine, natural disasters, and anything really preventable like disease. So, sickness. You have this. I've been playing with this all video. Sorry. So you have a reason to not have circular logic, so that you can actually go and measure the suffering inflicted rather than self-justifying every single selfish action. And humans are, of course, inherently selfish. I, I assume that's not up for debate. Um, I generally respond to comments in the comments section. So, like, if you think you're not inherently selfish, go ahead and tell me why. But yeah, if we just have a fallacious justification for any action whatsoever, well, that's going to lead to a lot of selfish behavior, because have we don't if you I would rather people teach their children to be able to measure the effects of their actions on others. So when you do pay someone for that hunk of carcass and you eat it, well, is that yummy taste of corpse that you're chewing really worth the suffering that you've paid an industry, a meat industry, a set of workers to inflict on your prey? Because that prey has a lifespan, and during that lifespan, they will be tortured, caged, possibly raped, have their children kidnapped and then murdered. All right, I have to go into the ignorance versus manipulativeness versus assholery argument, so remind me. But okay, so that was I sometimes type stuff instead of writing to remember, because I always type instead of writing. We have the suffering of, say, a cow, and then maybe they're tortured. They're basically enslaved all their life, and then there's a violent, maybe, so for the cow, they'd be like skewered through the head with an iron bar, and then slit throat, bled to death, and maybe they'd witness other cows suffering the same fate. And basically, until the oxygen in your brain runs out, you're still alive. So tips for suiciders. I can't give tips for suiciders, but basically, people who do commit suicide um, shouldn't be like mutilating their bodies by jumping off bridges, because even if you're decapitated, your brain still functions until the oxygen runs out. So you're still experiencing the pain of being decapitated or having your self smushed against the sidewalk. And, well, more importantly than making a mess on the sidewalk, there's also the negative effects on people who don't want you dead, maybe family members. And so you're going to be hurting them by committing suicide. But also, if you have a terminal illness, I totally approve of suicide. But if you don't, also think of all the good you could be doing. Um, Remember, we don't always have to be apathetic because if we're directly responsible for the harm we're causing, we can also be directly responsible for the good we're causing. And proportionally, if there's one more good person in the world, or if you even better, if you transform yourself from an asshole to a altruistic humanist person, maybe even defining animals and strong AI as people too, within your realm of altruism, with within your realm of rights activism, then you can actually be producing positive change. And the more people do that, the better the world becomes because now there's one less asshole, there's one less source of systematic cruelty, and there's one more person fighting against it. And overpopulation arguments aside, self extinction aside, um, if we can get more smart, caring, compassionate people, then apathetic, the opposite of what I just said, who are going to continue predating and murdering at the behest of corporations or um, just buying into this system of violence perpetrated against other species, of just really messed up exploitative capitalism. Like, I mean, capitalism as a system is just as good as communism. But when you have people exploiting the system, communism breaks down, capitalism breaks down, right? So you actually want to look at the supply chain. And so when I say exploitative capitalism, I mean where people exploit others down the supply chain line. You want to be choosing a supply chain. When you buy something, you want to be choosing something that's not going to screw over people. And I know that's impossible with habitat destruction and manufacturing, but you're generally presented with options. For example, um, you can choose the vegetarian option. You can choose the organic option and not spray Roundup and pesticides everywhere and fertilizers because okay, the thing with organic is fertilizers, pesticides, Roundup, those all take a lot of oil to make and they all kill a lot of bees and insects, and then there's the bioaccumulation. It kills other smaller animals, and then kills bigger animals, which eat those. And you could argue, well, oh, well, cats and puppies, nobody cares about them because they're predators, but um, it's still suffering inflicted by you. And so, ugh, I don't want to get into cats and dogs because everybody likes cats slash dogs. Um, hmm. But soon we'll have super meats. I guess you could argue if you do feel really, really shitty about having a cat or a dog, um, you're the one responsible for their diet because you're the one buying the food. You're the one paying for that food to be produced for that animal to be mistreated. So, if you're not gonna have your pet go vegetarian, uh, if you don't have access to vegetarian diet for your pet, or if you're too apathetic to do your own research, then there is carbon emissions trading, which is basically, well, I'm going to save these other lives in exchange for the lives which I'm murdering. And this goes into the whole assholery argument, right? Because you have no right to do that. You have no right to determine who dies and who doesn't. You have no right to exchange someone's life for another. And so there's this whole scenario I've been thinking of, which is like if you trick someone into believing that their death is for a great cause, so that they willingly die, is it okay to murder them? And what if it's not? What if it's a lie, right? And this is like, so would it be better if we could convince animals that their death is for a good cause? Um, well, we clearly believe it, right? Because we just people see like nature as like this divine thing, government as this divine thing, whether it's psychopaths in charge or predators in charge or not. It's like, oh well, this meal of rabbit, it's worth the rabbit's extremely violent death and suffering because it tastes good. Therefore, it's for the greater good. No, that those two are that those are completely different orders of magnitude of well-being and completely preventable, at least for humans. Um, Man, I'm actually starting to regret some of my pro-wolf activism. See, there's this. If only animals could self-regulate their overpopulation, wouldn't that be great? Then we wouldn't need predators. Of course, humans don't really have predators, so man, our species is really stupid. Hmm. Anyways, what was I saying? No, assholery. So, if we could trick prey, livestock, into believing like, oh well, here's the model, mental model, the thinking thought model. If you say to the prey, if you let me kill you, I'll save your mother, then if the prey says okay, then you kill them and you eat them. And that's basically like mentally the difference between a violent death and sedation, right? Because you're essentially letting them mentally accept their death. And that feeling of acceptance is incredibly important, but to you don't have the right to like manipulate your prey like that. And I know probably corporations try to do that to workers. Or do they? What is it? The American dream? Work hard, get rich? Never mind. Um, that's not even related, is it? What was the point I'm trying to make? Basically, trading one animal's rights for another's, or convincing someone that like their suffering, that you exploiting them, is somehow going to help their loved ones, is like really messed up. And like doing that is just being such a jerk, and you have no right to do that. But objectively, and maybe this is why people have so many problems with objective morality, it's the better thing. And also by objective morality, the better thing is a great goose scenario where we don't have the resources, but if it were possible, if say instantly nanites or nanobots or maybe like some super powerful weapon of mass destruction instantly annihilated all life on the planet, then it would be for the greater good because the net suffering would be reduced. But uh, instead, it looks like we're gradually going to kill off all life on the planet via desertification and runaway global warming and all those other fun mini events like pollinators, salinification, radioactivity, and atmosphere being completely messed up. So we get a lot of maybe radiation or runaway global warming, runaway uh, warming with because water vapor relative humidity goes up when the atmosphere warms up, and that means it holds more water vapor. But water vapor is a greenhouse gas, so planet just heats up like Venus. It wouldn't be as hot as Venus, but like you can still have all life go extinct without it being as hot as Venus. So I guess there'd still be like some little tardigrades left over, but that's not the same as having like life on the same order of magnitude of intelligence and self-awareness as humans. And not that humans are like the greatest. There's also like elephants and dolphins and parrots and sperm whales and cats. Now, I of course prefer the herbivorous intelligent life, but those are all comparably intelligent to humans. I mean, probably some are more smart than humans for sure, and some are less smart, depending on which animal you talk to. Because there's some really dumb. Well, most humans are really dumb, and that's just a statement of fact. Because like we're so irrational. Our education teaches us these circular logical fallacies, and to rely on those for self-justification, that's that is stupidity. Being fallacious is stupidity by definition. So obviously, if most people are like very religious and believe in a benevolent deity, then by definition, those beliefs that they're holding are stupid, and that makes them somewhat stupid. So uh, now I guess everyone thinks I'm an asshole for being condescending towards people, and I will say yes, I also have human idiosyncrasies and impulsive compulsions of instinctive pre-programmed directives to follow. But I do try to be logical and rational in my assertions, and uh, and I do value well, to be transparent, I value intelligent life minus the life. So basically, I value intelligent entities. That's my one meaning in life, right? This is after my existential crisis, and if people think it can be tough to go through an existential crisis while surrounded by loved ones who are basically selectively nihilist in their morality with if someone's outside of my cult, if someone's outside of my family, if someone's outside of my workplace or job, then they have no meaning or value whatsoever, and they are not human, and they are not people, and just we can exploit them if they're like a foreigner, or a different religion, or a different ethnicity, or not a family member. Then just exploit with just no regard for their well-being. Mm, that's a double standard, right? Because if you value your own intelligence, then you would value anything self-aware with a brain, some autonomy, and most importantly, those intelligences with self-awareness, the the awareness of one's own existence. Yeah, there's some nice philosophical quotes to go with that, aren't there? So, the second thing I value in life is this is kind of like disvaluing. I believe that pain and suffering are bad. I would like to live in a society where my well being is valued. Therefore, I value the well being of others. That is humanism. However, you can go one step farther. Let us say 1,000 years in the future, aliens invade, or maybe we have technological singularity. You guys know what that is, at least, right? So there's some super intelligent thing, let's say 100 times more intelligent than you are, and or than I am. Let's say 100 times more intelligent than I am, and it wants to eat my family. So I say, it's 100 times more intelligent than I am. So by the utility monster argument, should I be okay with it eating my family? If you are okay with it eating your family, then feel free to eat the families of things that are 100 times stupider than you. But if you're not okay with your family being murdered just because something happens to be more intelligent than you, right? And this is an important distinction of discrimination against unintelligent people. Is they still have rights. So if someone's rights end where another's begin, which is, I mean, there's certainly conflict of interests, but if I'm trying to have people's actions end where someone else's rights begin, never mind that. Never mind. Never mind. That's an ideology I grew up with. But if I don't want my family being murdered, then I shouldn't be murdering the families of stuff that's 100 times stupider than me, right? So if some super intelligent robot slash alien slash maybe some transhumanist augmented billionaire trillionaire person, what was that sound? Some game alert. Then there is then it would be hypocritical of me to turn around and prey on stupider species. So that is an extension of humanism where you say, all right, I'm not going to be hypocritical because if I think that more important entities should not prey on me, then I should not prey on less important entities with that proportion. Now, you say, well, if there's something that's so intelligent that they only see me as an ant, or they only see me proportional, like with how you value the meaning proportionally, not subjectively, like, oh, my family's so important, but like objectively, how you weigh the values, um, then you shouldn't be killing whatever is proportionally stupider than you, than the thing that is more intelligent than you don't want it killing, right? So if it sees you as an ant, but you value your family and you don't want it to kill your family, then you don't kill the ant. Mm. Now, for me, actually, I guess here this begs the obvious argument of, well, it's going to die anyways, right? The ant is going to die anyways. The worm is going to die anyways. The cow's going to, the human's going to die anyways. They're all going to die anyways, so why not just cull them all? And the answer is, no, you don't have the right to do that. And using that argument is hypocritical because then how can you value your own existence? And I'm sure there's a nihilistic response to this, um, but I am not a nihilist anymore. I was for like a week, and then I found it too depressing. So if there are nihilists who can answer the how do you resolve the it's going to die anyways argument, I would love to hear from you. But Stefanish, looking at you. But yeah, how is that an unpopular? Is nihilism like really unpopular? Anyways, the thing I think people don't like is the selective nihilism, where people have double standards, right? And so they treat their family different from how they would treat an animal of the same intelligence, or three animals of the net same intelligence. It's really sad. So let's have some orange juice to distract ourselves from the horrors of reality. Organic, Merit selection, though. Merit selection is like taking over all the Canadian food production. So I tried to avoid them because of indies. Anyways, I won't get into the importance of not having monopolies. Hashtag Monsanto. Um, oh god. Okay, Monsanto Bayer merger. Bayer, known for white phosphorus production during World War II. Monsanto, known for Agent Orange production during Vietnam War. What do these two companies have in common? Well, they both have massive monopolies over food production. Um, and they both have helped to murder millions of people. Not a good combination, in my opinion. So those two companies had a merger in 2016. Great year, Kappa. Kappa means dripping sarcasm. Um, at least when I use it. So yeah, the reason I just automatically always instantly dismiss the "they're going to die anyways" argument is because I find it hypocritical. I think it's a double standard because you can just as easily apply it to yourself, and then now your life is all suddenly bereft of all meaning. So if you're not planning to go to heaven or to upload yourself into a computer simulation or maybe revive as some post-humanist android in the future. Um, and I think that uploading yourself into a digital simulation, running your brain in a computer program is more moral than harvesting clones of yourself and just like beheading them and implanting your brain into the body. That's like, I'm curious to know if the first human head transplant worked, but like, I don't really like the concept of like just brain transplants as a means of immortality because who's going to donate their bodies? That's that's not something you should be harvesting living people. So I think it's much better to have and safer. Okay, obviously hackers break everything, but um, I think it would be ideal if everyone were basically an AI. If everyone just became an AI, animals too. And then if someone died, well, we would have a backup copy of them. And then there's all these interesting questions with like, well, what if there's two identical backup copies both running at the same time? Or like, what if you turn off the computer? Is it the same as being asleep? Or does that just mean you're dead, but they can be revived, like with a defibrillator, but by turning on the computer, then the program's running? But like, what if you have two computers running the same program? Is it both the same person? Am I the same person as I was yesterday? Wait, but if I'm not the same person as I was yesterday, then who am I today? And like, but there's only one of me, so can I actually assume the identity of who I was yesterday? These are interesting questions, but it can also lead to another interesting question, which is, do people with multiple personalities count as one person or more than one person? Interesting questions. And if they count as more than one person, well, which proportion their uh, of the net importance of that body, of that brain, I mean, can be attributed to each identity. And like, well, but self-identity shifts with mood. And so, yeah, there's an interesting emotional problem of I always attribute emotions to well-being, but emotions also affect mental state. So you can be talking to someone and then they get angry and it's a different person. Would that be a valid measurement of who someone is? And so who really are you talking to? And so who is talking right now, like which of my self identities is the dominant speaker right now, and how can you ascertain like which self identity I have when I am communicating with you, and which identity's thoughts am I conveying, and which proportion of my importance as an intelligent organism can be attributed to the speaker. And then when you're hurting my feelings, which aspects of me are you offending? How much cognitive dissonance or mental chaos are you causing? And is that justified by positive change or not? So these are questions I um, ask occasionally. I mean, maybe like at least once a week, I'll like ask these questions, but that's like maybe for when you're bored or or very simulated and thoughtful. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. So in conclusion, we want to have the freedom to explore logical, self, what's the opposite of self-contradictory? Self-consistent paradigms, self-consistent ideologies, beliefs that don't contradict with reality. I'm not going to talk about reality, but there's a nice Google definition for reality, so I'll read that out. Reality is the world or the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. So, in reality, karma doesn't exist, but the suffering that can be measured does exist. So karma would just be a measurement. For me, when I talk about karma, it's not this supernatural force. It's just a scientific measurement of suffering over time. I guess the integer of suffering with respect to time. Wait, what would be then? What would be the plus constant? I'm confusing myself. Um, I've said everything I wanted to. So this is Reminiscable. Oh my gosh. Maybe I should have brushed my hair, taken a shower before making. I just realized how like completely messy my hair is. Oh well. Uh, I'm sure it can. I want to make videos with the awesome hair prior to changing it up. Oh yeah, it's all matted where I slept on it. Maybe I could always get this is a joke, but I could always get like plastic surgery and nose realignment from when it got broken, and like the hair perms and just have the curls hanging at the bottom, and trim the beard and the laser waxing thingy, and then what do you pluck the eyebrows and just start taking estrogen and testosterone uh, deactivators. I don't know the word. A biologist would know. What inhibitors, testosterone inhibitors, and just pump in that estrogen and have the nice feminine features that are so prized. A lot of males in society are just seen as worthless trash by society. Um, Not necessarily me, but by society, just males are considered worthless and females are considered sexual objects, and it's a little sad. It's very sad, really, but it's hard to I need to explore that concept more. I should figure out class differences. And there was an interesting article on shame and how objectification is like a byproduct of feeling embarrassed over being aroused by someone because people attribute arousal over other people's appearance rather than their own emotions. And so, yeah, I guess people want some like way to justify their emotions when really it's this instinctive programming which we are controlled by, and also, yes, the outside stimuli. It's a combination of both, but we have some control over both outside stimuli and over our own emotions, or at least over our actions. Although it can be difficult because it can feel like we're swimming or uh, being overwhelmed by instinctive compulsions. So, yeah, maybe I'll talk about that later once I have thought out what I would want to say about those topics. But for now, this was Ranting with Reminiscable. So I'll see you guys next time.